We're live. GHC 0103. Wait, we're 0301, aren't we?
That's our My Zone password. Alrighty, guys. Welcome back to another week of the Train the Trainer podcast. Today, we want to dive into a topic of servant leadership, which is a topic we just had a summit for our leaders within our company with Genesis Health Clubs, and it was one of the themes that we touched on is how to be better servant leaders, elevating ourselves by elevating our teams and helping them see success. So that's what we want to talk about today, both for leaders, of course, but then also for trainers who may not always see themselves as leaders, but very much are for the clients that they lead. So to kick it off, Tiger, how would you define a servant leader?
So a servant leader to me is somebody, sort of doing something either because it's A, the right thing to do, or B, it's the best thing to do for the person you're working with or the people that are underneath you. So as a trainer, like taking care of my clients to the best of my ability should have nothing to do with how much they're paying me or when they pay me or anything along those lines. It's just about what's the best service I could possibly provide for this person. I think a lot of times when it comes to servant leadership, it almost like seems sacrificial to some degree, like you're sacrificing something. I think that can be a negative route to move down, though. I wouldn't want it to be sacrificial, but it should be just because it's the right thing to do.
It's a fine line for sure, because you never want to get to the point where when you say sacrificial, it kind of carries that negative connotation to it, where people feel like they can't get ahead, when in reality, at least in my opinion, the only way to win long-term in this game, or really in most entrepreneurial endeavors, or most businesses that require like an infinite game type perspective, where the goal of the business is to keep in business and move forward. The only way to win long-term is to put others' needs ahead of your own. And then over time, you'll end up winning as well.
We have like the give first mantra that we tout really proudly at our club with all of our trainers. And so that's servicing our clients and giving as much value away as we can. And then we do we do those corporate challenges. And that's always our number one priority is like, how much can we give away? What all can we give them?
100%. It can be pretty easy. Especially when we look at, this is what we do for jobs and as a career and what we do for income to provide for our families and, all of our wants in life and everything that we care to have. It can be a challenge and very easy to fall into what we call like a transactional leader's mindset. Maybe I shouldn't tag leader along with that, because I don't think if you're being transactional, you really are leading. But a very transactional relationship with either your employees or your clients, where because of what they give you, you'll give back. And you're gauging how much effort to put towards someone, how much time, how much attention to help that person with, based on what you feel like you're receiving. It's really an inward focus and very internal focus, which of course is going to impact how you feel about that person, about your job, and it's going to impact what you do as well. You might even withhold effort, which of course will impact your result. So it's a really easy trap to fall into as a leader and as a trainer too.
This is one of those things that can like encompass every single thing that you do. Very easily can you apply this like your personal life when it comes to friends or spouse, etc. But also I think about like as a trainer that maybe wants to move up. So if you're one of our trainers at Genesis and it's like, okay, I want to move up and be a fitness manager one day. You could look at this very seriously as a way for you to get that promotion or get that next spot is what can I give the company first? I remember I was having a conversation actually with my sister and my dad these last few days. And my dad's elected to stay with a smaller company as opposed to taking this bigger job that he had been offered. And one of his big things was like, well, the company's taking care of me and I want to take care of the company and stay here. And I remember his boss like cried and was just super excited he's staying there. And I think that is, even though it might not be as much income immediately for my father, I think long-term that's a better play because he's, again, I think doing kind of what's right and giving first even to his own company. I think we, at least in my generation, it's kind of a rare trait anymore. I don't think you see young people do that as often because my sister was arguing super hard against it. Like, I don't owe my company anything. My company pays me for my time and only that. And I was like, okay, well, that's what's going to keep you where you're at in your company.
It's a quick way to stay stuck. I wouldn't expect you to share this story, but I'm going to share it on your behalf. So This was several years ago now, but as I kind of elevated within the ranks of Genesis Health Club, so to speak, I was still somewhat managing my home location, which is where Tiger was a trainer. It came time to make a pivot and make a move out of that location, but very often in any kind of transition, you worry about who's going to take the baton and if they can carry it forward and continue that forward momentum. So essentially, Tiger was asked to run the club for a year, pretty much for free, and he did so without complaint. And after that year was over, was rewarded with, one of the highest, the highest and most lucrative management positions in the company. Now it took a while, right? You invested a lot of time, effort, without an immediate return, but because you were able to delay that immediate demand for gratification that need to be transactional and be rewarded now, you're able to have a bigger payout on the other end.
It opens a lot of doors for you, I feel like, because the company knows that you're keeping, I guess, the company in mind, right? And when you keep the company in mind, or keep the people, ahead of you or around you or below you in mind, and as a main priority, they tend to do the same back for you. I think it would be impossible for me to get, my clients to purchase a year of personal training up front in the month of November to help me out, or to do hey, you still have 12 sessions left, but I really need you to help me out this month. Those type of things don't happen if you're not giving your clients something first. And they know that I've given them so much in the past, and I'm going to continue to give them everything I can. So if I ever ask for anything, it gets taken care of. And it's been the same, truthfully, with Genesis, is anytime I need something, it seems like I get taken care of pretty quick. But it's because I'm focused more on how much I give them.
People want servant leaders to succeed. They don't typically care to see transactional individuals succeed. For years, I think what really helped position me into a spot where I could move up to sound a little self-promoting and share my story, but similar to Tiger's, is I would consistently go to upper management, upper leadership, and ask, well, what value can I provide? Not asking for anything in return, whether that be something as simple as editing a playbook, or assisting with payroll, or taking on some struggling clubs without expectation of any compensation, just because I don't want a department or a piece of my company to be struggling. And I simply offered that to the point where, okay, well, at this point, it makes sense to, it would be unfair for you to continue in this role without elevation. So for sure, it definitely opens doors. The more you give, the more you'll end up receiving. I believe it's Gary Vee who has that old marketing principle, the jab, jab, right hook, where oftentimes in sales or in, any business transaction, right? And even a training session is a transaction. Oftentimes, people go in immediately with the right hook. They immediately go for the kill. They immediately go for as much value as they can get in a single amount of effort. When in reality, most of the best marketing strategies are built on how much free information can we give you, or how much jabs can we do to open you up, until eventually you open it up and almost ask for the right hook, right? And then the ROI skyrockets.
Yeah, I think so. Daniel G, do you know that is Daniel G, Middle Eastern dude? He does a bunch of sales stuff. I really like the stuff he's been putting out lately. But he has one of my favorite videos that I send to all my new trainers when they start, where he talks about sales in general. And it doesn't matter what sales job you're in. It's really going to be a lot of work for pretty much no pay in order to get paid dramatically more later for the work you did in the past. And I think that's very much embodies at your career as you start as a trainer. The more free stuff, more free sessions you can give away, the better you're going to do. And it's almost hard to give away free sessions sometimes. And that's how you know you're doing a good job, is when it's tough for you to give them all away, because either A, you're running out of time, or B, you're contacting so many people and offering it, and some are just saying no. And that's a good problem to run into. I know we pulled my numbers the other day because we switched how we store data through our company in the last couple of years. But I was curious how many, free consultations I had done on a monthly basis in the beginning of my career. And I knew it was a lot, but I never focused too much on redeeming them. There was probably double the number we have reported was being done. And so for the first 2.5 years, I think, of my entire career as a trainer, I give away 10 plus free training sessions every single month. And I think in my second year or maybe my third year, I started my free boot camp that I was teaching for clients. I can't remember how many free training sessions I've given away to clients. It's just like, hey, you're not working out on your own. Let's just get an extra one this week for free. And I probably give away less now, of course, just because I don't have quite as much time. But I think every top trainer we've ever had at that club either ran like a free boot camp for all their clients, or we're giving away 10 plus free training sessions every single month in order to grow their business.
Yep.
It's almost like a minimum standard. I mean, I always show my charts to my new trainers that I have about what happens if you give 7 free sessions away every month and your chart just goes like this with your business. And then if you're only giving away 2 to 3, it just stays flat. It's like, you just got to give.
If you give more value than what you're paid for, you will have abundance, not just, I mean, financially.
That's a Zig Ziglar quote in there somewhere.
Somewhere. Something on a mosh of Jim Rohn's and Zig Ziglar, all of them. But like in your third year, when you were giving all that stuff away for free, like you were wanting for anything. Meanwhile, you had trainers that were very hesitant to where I don't even want to do a free consultation because I might only make a minimum wage or something lesser than my hourly commission rate in order to do those. So they wouldn't put in that extra time to potentially help that person. And those people were left impoverished, right? Not just financially, because they stayed the same every year or eventually trickled off, but they were poor between the ears, right? They were always thinking about the scarcity and what they didn't have and weren't getting, and how they weren't getting extra paid vacation time, and they weren't getting all these extra benefits that they just felt like they deserved, or if they would have gotten, then they would have worked harder. It's backwards thinking.
I mean, I'll tell you that this is maybe the most important part about being transactional versus not being transactional when it comes to being an employee in general. It is super easy to find transactional employees. It's probably the easiest thing on the planet to find somebody who will come in, work the exact hour I want them to work, and get exactly what I want them to get paid. That's an easy, replaceable spot. It's very hard to replace somebody that's on the other side where they're on the servant leadership thing. And so if you're wondering about job security, whether that's in the personal training world or in a different world, I think this is such a huge thing that you can focus on. It's just doing a little bit more than what you're supposed to do, or a little more than what's asked of you. And you don't have to worry about the job security portion either.
2 things. One is it's such a great analogy, like with fitness too. I'm sure most trainers out there have probably heard from potential clients, like, oh, I'll get a trainer once I get in shape, right? Or I'll, like once I lose a bunch of weight or I start seeing my abs, then I'm going to start eating clean, right? Like it's such a, I mean, people, you see it all the time with people being transactional towards their fitness. Like I'll actually do what it takes to be fit once I'm fit, which is backwards. And it's really easy to point out in other people, and it's a little harder for ourselves. But whenever I'm thinking about like working with an employee, something I want them to be able to take home every day is just a personal satisfaction and personal pride in what they do. Now, pride only comes from doing more than what's expected. If you just meet expectations, there's no pride there, right? You're just doing your job. You're doing what you're supposed to. But if you're able to do just a little bit more, right? And maybe that's above expectations, or, I mean, from what you did yesterday, you just do a little bit more, then that leaves you with that personal pride and satisfaction that, I mean, can turn into a long, fulfilling, and successful career.
I agree with that 100%. I mean, that was one of the topics conversation with me, my dad, and my sister in this past week, because we were talking, I mean, about this same topic. But I mean, I would say I love my job. My dad would say he loves his job. I love the company I work for. My dad says the same thing. My sister wouldn't say that. And so I think it's one of those things where if you want to end up loving what you're doing, which makes a huge difference in your overall life. I mean, that's half of your life on a weekly basis is what you're doing for work. Mm-hmm. If you want to love it, you should do the extra and have that pride that comes along with it.
So which comes first? If you love your company will love you, or you'll only love your company if your company loves you?
I think you love your company first.
For sure. That was the biggest difference.
The company's already established.
Right.
That's the thing. That's what I'm saying. Transactional employees are easy to find. Yeah. So it's like, no offense, your company's not just going to give you stuff for doing what they asked you to do. That's what they pay you for. Yeah. For them to give you more is like, why would I give them more? Because you're doing more. So you have to do more.
Yep. Any company will naturally just love their opportunity, right? So if you love and buy into and add value to that opportunity, then they will love you back. Mm-hmm. And that's where, I mean, a lot of people get that switched, it sounds like. And I have plenty of family members that are that way too, where if they were in any kind of like performance-based or commission-based structure, like they would go crazy because What about me getting taken care of, right? You'll get taken care of if you take care of the business and the opportunity that's in front of you.
You're so much more empowered as a person too to take that responsibility on and that ownership as an employee, and it makes it to where, I mean, like, let's say Genesis imploded tomorrow, which we're all hoping doesn't happen, but let's say it did. I'm confident you and I would be okay. I'm not as confident when I think about some of the more transactional employees that we have with our staff that they would be completely successful on their own or in another environment or another company. That's a scary thing. But having that pride, and that's the cool thing, is I didn't have that when I first started. Not necessarily the pride portion of it or like the servant portion of it. That's kind of always been something I think somewhat was in me, where I was willing to kind of give more first. But that confidence to be successful on my own, regardless of where I'm at, came through me doing that additional work.
Because you know that you will give without immediate expected return, which in turn ends up...
If you're willing to delay your gratification, you're probably going to find success in pretty much anything. So having that skill like completely developed has been super useful.
One piece that I wanted to touch on, because we discussed it at our leadership summit, was the emotional resilience that a servant leader's mindset affords them as opposed to a transactional leader. And then we might have talked about this in a few podcasts
We talked about it recently.
But when your focus is external on delivering value to other people, delivering value to an organization or a mission, etc., right? It takes the focus off of, anything internal that you might lack, right? And those things typically manifest themselves in like frustrations or anxieties or like, what am I not giving myself or getting myself? You're instead focusing on like maxing out effort towards other people. And then if something goes wrong, it's like, okay, well, I care about that person or that thing. I'm going to simply like problem solve until I can improve. Where those that are a little bit more transactional, or they're coming from a place of scarcity, you can very easily tell that in the moment because their emotions are like through the roof, right? They're frustrated, they're anxious, right? As a leader, they're blaming their employees because their employees aren't winning and that's forcing them not to win. Or they're upset at their bosses, right? Because they're the reason why they can't win, or the organization, or whatever it might be. And it's coming from a decision of focus where you're focusing on yourself or on others. And one is liberating and the other is constraining. I know we talked about that in personal relationships too, right? Between us spouses, right? One that's focused on loving the other person. It's easy to set their own emotions aside and then end up being taken care of emotionally or personally or with whatever, ideal goals you might have in a relationship. And then vice versa as well.
I think you really helped me a lot with this. I think probably in the beginning of 2023 when I first, really started owning all the leadership stuff at the club, and I get kind of frustrated with some of my employees, and I get mad. And you'd always tell me that one, that me being mad was only serving me, and then two, I like to naturally be a little bit blunt and straightforward. It's something I like wear as a badge. Where I've always been proud of being blunt. And so I'd always defend it. And Andy would always tell me like, yeah, Tiger, but are you blunt for them or blunt for you? And I was like, dang, it only benefits me to be blunt because it allows me to have my conversation I want to have faster. But that's not necessarily what's going to be effective to get what I want for this person. We want our employees to succeed. We don't succeed without them. And so it's been a hard turn of the cruise ship on that. But I think the biggest thing I've been able to do is, and I think I've talked about this before, is identifying my frustration and then using that as like an indicator to express sympathy instead. And so rather than ever being angry at my employees or angered at anybody, rather be sympathetic at the fact that they either don't know what the right decision is or don't know what they should be doing or they don't know quite how. And that allows you to kind of change your approach a little bit. And that's kind of gotten rid of my blunt attack right away thing. So now I get frustrated and that's like slow myself down and I pause a little bit and I think about it and then I come at it with the sympathetic side and try to actually coach them with where they're at. And that's been a big game changer, I think, for my staff, and it's made a huge difference in our one-on-ones.
It keeps us focused more on what that person might need in that moment to improve as opposed to just what we want to express.
So in relation to that, though, I think that's a good example of servant leadership because as a leader of your team, and PTs can apply this to clients, you're bearing the emotional toll for them of that situation that you guys are talking about. And I think that's servant leadership again, because you're taking the emotional, responsibility to calm yourself down and have the appropriate conversation. Whereas it'd be easier, it'd be transactional to just attack them directly right away. and then have them try to deal with the emotions of how that feels, etc. I know that might be a little bit like tiered above for some of the people listening, just kind of depends. But I think with trainers, it's kind of the same thing. I mean, you guys have clients come in who are going to have their little emotional things they got going on with their personal lives, etc. And being a servant leader for them is going to be that same thing, like where you're willing to listen to them and you're willing to do that extra stuff, even though that's not necessarily what you're doing training wise. My job's not to be a therapist, but at the same time, like if I'm going to be a servant to this person, because that's what's best for them, I'm going to listen to whatever nonsense potentially they want to talk about. Remember, we had a trainer one time at like 5 a.m. yell at one of their clients, like angrily, because their client was expressing some frustrations they were having in their own personal life. And he was talking about how like, oh, this has nothing to do with my job. This is what I'm here for, etc. I'm like, well, you just made that relationship completely transactional now. And next time you go and ask that client to renew, they're going to probably have 10 times more hesitation.
For sure. And that brings me back to the point that I was failing to articulate before, is like when our focus is on the other person, yes, we can identify what they lack, because we're not just focused on what we want to express, but we can also focus on where our level of leadership might not like be where it needs to be yet. And that's empowering because it gives you ownership, right? It may not make you feel good immediately, but you're going to get over that pretty quick because you're focused on the other person. So like, for instance, in that moment where that trainer was upset at their client for expressing something emotionally that they were going through, right? A limitation they had, all the other trainer could see was their own limitation. Either they saw themselves in that other person and was hurting too, or they saw their own limitation with, I don't know how to help this person right now. And because I'm thinking about myself, I'm just going to react and ratchet up and try to repress it. As opposed to, staying focused on the other person, saying like, I wish I knew how to help you better right now. How could I best help you in this moment?
It's like, I think it was Jordan Peterson who said something along the lines of like, your life will get better in direct proportion with how much responsibility you're willing to bear. Mm-hmm. When I think of that quote, it very much reminds me of what it means to be a servant leader, where you're taking responsibility for every single variable and everything that could possibly be going on around you in relation to your career or even your relationships, etc. I think truthfully, that's the only way to ever get anywhere is to just take an obsessive amount of responsibility for everything. Extreme ownership kind of outlines that. Right. And I think that one trait in itself kind of embodies what it means to be a servant leader. If you're nailing that, you'll probably do a good job on the servant side.
For sure. With one like caveat, like when you're taking that ownership, it's not just like a self-abuse exercise where you can like,
it's not a sacrifice.
You can soothe your ego by like, yeah, I feel bad, or I took ownership and like I'm not good. Like a lot of times people get stuck in that like self-development purgatory where like, yes, I've taken ownership, but then they never like take it to the next level where they do anything with that. Because right then it's really just lip service. Because if you don't do anything with it, you really haven't owned the problem. Because then once you do, you have to own the solution too. And I feel like sometimes people get stuck there. You see it less as people elevate and kind of like grow as leaders, but I see it very often with trainers who love to own all their problems, but don't quite
do anything.
They need a little bit extra help, a little bit extra of a nudge to take ownership of the solution as well.
I have a good story for this. So we had a client recently with one of my trainers who decided to quit working with him and switch to a different trainer in our club. And so I called the trainer and we were talking about everything that had happened. And I had noted that this particular trainer had ended these appointments, I'd say a little bit early. I noticed it multiple times, which means it's happening. You know what I mean? If I see it 2 or 3 times, that means you're definitely doing it more often than what I'm seeing it. But he kept ending these appointments like 15 minutes early. And I remember I told him like 2 months ago, I'm like, hey man, like you got to stop doing that. Like you're going to lose these people. And he's like, nah, man, it's all, we don't even do that. We don't end early. I'm like, saw you do it. But anyway, so these clients decided to transfer over to another trainer 2 months later, which I told you, you know what I mean? And so I called them and, it's my job to kind of discuss that with him and let him know, hey, this client's transferring. So the client doesn't have to talk to that trainer and I just handle it, so it's all good. But it was really important to me that, this trainer took ownership and realized like, okay, this is where I went wrong. This is what I could have done better. And so that was what I was asking him about. I was like, hey, like, where do you think we could have been better here? And he was like, I know it's my fault, Tiger. I get it. I know you want it to be my fault. And so you want me to say it's my fault. He goes, but I don't genuinely know what I could have done different. And it's such an easy thing for me to be like, well, you could end the session, at an hour instead of 45 minutes, but I didn't want to give him the answers. But that's a perfect example of like, I'm literally saying I'm taking ownership, but there's nothing else I could have done. Well, then you're not taking ownership. That's not ownership. That's just you saying something. This doesn't matter.
Right. People would rather soothe their ego than
100%. 100%.
Anything else you want to beat up on this topic?
That's good. We were kind of all over the place, which we're not. Normally we get a little warmed up. So if your guys are like lost on this topic, Andy, what would you, if you were to give it like one big, ideal sentence of, hey, this is how we'd recommend you act, behave, etc. as a leader, in relation to servant leadership, what would that be? What would that look like?
Be so focused on delivering value on other people that you're not concerned with the value that comes back to you, knowing that it will over enough time.
Perfect. I think that does it.
My daughter and I were just watching Lord of the Rings before nap time, which is probably not super appropriate given that she's 4. But in the second movie, the king, who's not yet the king, but he says this quote where you give hope to others, keep none for yourself. And that being the mantra of the king. Right? That's what makes him worthy of becoming king. And I think that, if that's the focus of any leader, they're probably going to have followers that want them to win and are going to work hard to help them win and help drive towards the mission. And if trainers, you have that same focus with your clients, they're going to want to see you win, and they're going to want to stay working with you for a long time too. So it's a super beneficial mindset and focus to adopt. That's really what it is. It's more of a focus. Like, who am I focusing on? Me or other people? If you stay focused on other people, you'll be taken care of.
It's such a rare trait that it's incredibly attractive. And I think if you're sitting there and you're like thinking, if you were like looking for an example around you, because obviously you might not be directly, interacting with us or somebody else, but if you're thinking about that person that you could count on in pretty much any situation for anything, that's your servant leader example, right? And if I think about that person like, oh, if I absolutely needed something, who could I call? I have that name in my head, and I'm like, yeah, that's a servant leader, because he would do that for not just me, but probably anybody. And I think that's a great way of like realizing how you can obtain it is follow that person that you think of.
Not just anybody that will like help me like get out of the dirt, or like they'll come console me, or they'll make me feel better. Like, no, they'll get me back on my feet. They'll make me brush my shoulders off, and they're going to push me towards becoming the best that I possibly can be. One other thought as we were closing that I thought was appropriate, but we were talking about that was a week or so ago, the reverse charisma or inverse charisma. I feel like that was a great like trait that followed along with servant leadership, is like be interested more than you care about being interesting. And again, that being a super attractive trait. People like being around, even more so, interesting people that make them feel interesting. So as leaders, as we can provide that for our team, it empowers them to then pass that down to their clients, and hopefully do the same thing.
Yes, sir.
We could probably keep just throwing asides in here. So we're going to stop here. Hard stop. Hopefully this was valuable to you. And we look forward to catching you guys again next week.